Hey YouTube, it's Chuck. Good morning. Well, it is late August here in Jacksonville, Florida, Zone 9A, and we have had a pretty quiet tropical season so far, but we are about 2 days away from tropical storm, probably going to very soon be Hurricane Idea. So, tropical storms and beekeeping. Let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, this is not dissimilar from many other sorts of activities where beekeepers have to protect their hives. Up north in the mountains, you have to protect your hives from bears. You have to use electrical fences. A hive that falls over from a bear is not very different from a hive that falls over from a hurricane. One difference being that a bear will continue to go after the hive even if it falls over, whereas a hurricane, it's all about preventing the hives from falling over as best you can. There's a couple things to think about with regards to storms and your beehives. The number one and probably the biggest consideration is location of your apiary. Are you in a very wide open space with a long fetch, which means the long distances where wind can come down to ground level and go at the gust speeds of the storm when it hits your hive? Or are you perhaps in a location like my apiary where I've got my hives all the way up against a nice brush hedge and they're blocked from the wind? Do you live in an area like I do with large oak trees that are very, very solid, where most of the wind is at treetop level, not down here? The one thing to recognize is down in this, kind of below the treetops, is the winds can swirl around a little bit more than a straight line wind direction. So obviously, in this scenario, and I'll just give you some directions, that is east, that is north. So the back of my hives are facing north, and the entrances are pretty much facing due south, which is, in my opinion, the optimal location to have your hives face, but obviously this was based on the property line where I live. So with a storm and any sort of tropical system, there's a counterclockwise flow around that low pressure system. So based on whether or not the storm is going to travel to the north of you or the south of you or east of you or west of you, you can generally figure out what direction the predominant winds are going to impact your apiary location. This is very important based on how you might choose to handle securing your hives. In this week's situation, and I will probably have shown you a couple pictures of the storm and maybe another one right now, the storm is currently projected to go to the north of Jacksonville, Florida, which means I'm more than likely going to have southerly and westerly wind directions, which is directly into my hives or directly kind of slanted here, not from behind. So securing the hives is kind of a consideration here if I got some winds coming directly at the hives. Just a thought on wind direction and how you can sort of predict wind direction. Obviously, the storm can change very, very quickly, and you need to perhaps prepare for all wind directions. And let's talk a little bit about that. How can you secure your hives? Two different main ways people secure their hives. One is with straps. Those of you that shop at Harbor Freight may recognize these very cheap ratchet straps. They're very inexpensive. I'll probably put a link in the description below and maybe show you what they look like. They are as cheap as you can get, but they're strong and they do the job. They basically are long enough to typically go over a hive, and if they're not, you can typically join two of them together to go over a hive, and I might get to show you that here in a second. The second is with weight. So you can put bricks, you can put concrete blocks, and I'll just go ahead and show you now, on top of a single that doesn't need a whole lot. A simple weight, that's more than enough to hold that hive down unless the entire rack falls over for a different reason. Something like this may only need a couple of bricks, but if you've got cinder blocks like this, you can definitely put them on top of your hives, add some additional weight. Now, recognize when you're adding weight to your rack system, you've got to make sure that your rack system can support all of that extra weight if you're adding tons and tons of weight to an already perhaps loaded up rack. Now, with a ratchet strap, it's as you might expect, just like you were securing something down in the back of your truck. Just basically go around the hive and ratchet it down. And I'll show you how I do this. And if I get a little bit flummoxed, I might speed it up just so you can see me actually do it. And I'll show you how I do that. Okay, there there you go. And like I said, getting flummoxed by ratchet straps is not uncommon based on the way the direction they go. You don't need to put an enormous amount of stress on them. You're just basically holding that hive together, and the weight of the hive is what is holding it onto the rack. So you actually might need to choose hive weight. You know, this obviously has some honey in it. This has got a double deep, and this weighs several hundred pounds, probably 180 pounds probably. So the weight of this is just holding it together and going down. So I'm actually not attaching it to the rack in this moment. Now, I can take a second strap, and I'll show you here. You can go around the actual base of the strap and go underneath to actually secure it to the rack, based on if it was a smaller box or a smaller hive, but I don't need to show you how to do that. That just makes common sense. But the important point about this video is, as a beekeeper, you need to watch the weather, just like we do with rain, nectar flows, pollen sources, and now damaging winds. Obviously these are predictable. It's not like a tornado or a thunderstorm that sweeps in unannounced. This is coming, has the potential to have very high winds, and we need to prepare for it. And especially for beekeepers here in Florida. If you're in the Tampa, up at the Big Bend area, up near Cedar Key, where the storm is directly going to impact, you might need to consider floods. If your apiary is in a flood zone, these hives are going to float. There may be nothing you can do there. Obviously, if you can move your apiary, that would be probably preferred if you expect it to flood. But second guessing whether or not your area is going to absolutely flood, and whether or not you have the time or ability to move an entire apiary in the amount of time you have, is something you need to personally consider. But in rivers and flood zones, this happens very frequently. You put apiaries in a floodplain and a big rainstorm for weeks happens, the entire apiary will just wash downhill. Something to consider if you're very, very near the ocean point of impact. Here in this area with the river, we do not typically get that high of floods. At least in the 30 years I've lived here, it has never come up into my lawn in this area in all those storms I've experienced. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Maybe just give you a little bit of a thought. Nothing revolutionary here, but a reminder, and perhaps a little bit of a library here on my channel about tropical storms and beekeeping and options you have for securing your hives. And a little bit to think about wind direction, location of your apiary, and perhaps even in the future where you might place your apiary if you live in an area prone to this kind of weather. Hope you enjoy this kind of content. Leave me a comment down below if you think so. Have a great day, everybody. See you next time.